An Introduction to Climate Justice and Climate Injustice. 90% of historical greenhouse gas emissions has been caused by the 25 most polluting countries, largely wealthy global north countries. Climate change threatens to irreversibly damage our planet. In the same way that a homeless person will be far more vulnerable to a rainstorm than a person with a house, poor countries are far more susceptible to the impacts of climate change than the wealthy countries that are responsible for the crisis. This is climate injustice. It is estimated that currently 150,000 people a year will die from the impacts of climate change, and that number will only rise as the climate crisis worsens. By 2020, 250 million people in Africa are predicted to experience water shortages, another 77 million in South America. By 2020, 49 million in Asia will be facing food shortages, while some parts of Africa could lose up to 50% of their agricultural capacity. Rising sea levels caused by melting ice threatens low-lying countries and small island states. Many residents of Tuvalu, a small island nation in the South Pacific, have already been forced to evacuate. A 1-meter rise in sea levels would displace 10 million people in Vietnam. A 1.5-meter rise in sea levels threatens to displace 15 million people in Bangladesh. Meanwhile, a 2-meter sea level rise would engulf the entire country of the Maldives, a country in the Indian Ocean. Wars and conflicts are predicted to arise over severe shortages in food, water, and land. The consequences of climate change are more severe in poor countries, yet people in countries like Canada are still threatened, especially those who live in Arctic indigenous communities. Changes to the Arctic ecosystem, like melting ice, vanishing tundra ponds, and changes to wildlife patterns are compromising the ability of many indigenous peoples to live off the land in their traditional ways. Elsewhere in Canada, climate change will lead to food shortages. Saskatchewan, Canada's breadbasket, is predicted to lose 30% of its food growing potential as a result of climate change. These impacts and future threats are all examples of climate injustice. Climate justice means preventing the serious consequences of climate change in a fair and equitable way. Climate justice is the inclusion, fair treatment, and meaningful involvement of all peoples regardless of race, gender, age, national origin, or income when developing and implementing climate policy. Climate justice is green jobs for all, in an economy based on a clean source of energy that does not come from fossil fuels. It is renewable energy that respects the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples in Canada and around the world. It is time for climate justice.